At this hour, I'm Christina Awayo in Dallas, and here are your top stories.
I've got one question for the ranking member. Ranking Member Waters, in a 2008 hearing, you said, quote, "And guess what this liberal will be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing, would be about basically taking over the government and the government running all of your companies," end quote. It's a simple question. Do you stand by that statement?
Simple answer. I am here today in this Rules Committee because we're taking up time with basically a non-issue. First of all, you claim that socialism has engulfed this country, that it keeps creeping, it's going to take over private businesses, et cetera, et cetera. That is not happening. We're in a democracy that we're trying very much to save and to not have disrupted, undermined in the way that...
So then, reclaiming my time, the gentlelady denounces your previous statement then, and do not accept that previous statement that you think you would take over these private businesses?
I'm not a socialist. I'm a capitalist, and I commit to you that I am here to save Social Security, to save Medicare, to save seniors and veterans, and for some of you who have adopted certain kind of ways that you support what you now claim is socialism, I'm here to say to you, come on.
So this liberal will be all about socializing, will be all about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies. You disagree with that? You now denounce that statement?
I am not a socialist.
Okay.
All right?
So I appreciate the response. I think that to the extent that one has a concern as a member of this body or as an American watching this, one has concerns when we hear statements like this, and that's not the only one. And statements by some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle extolling the virtues of socialism. As I just pointed out, a nicer way of confiscating businesses, a nicer way of confiscating the assets and the means of production. When now, as I think the gentleman from Kentucky was alluding to, in 1929, federal spending was 3% of GDP. At the height of COVID, 31% of GDP. In FY22, we collected a record $4.9 trillion in revenue, but still had a $1.4 trillion deficit. I think one question I would ask the chairman of Financial Services is, do you have full control over the means of production if you're a company in this country, but yet the government is regulating you so much that you cannot actually carry out the use of the capital for the purpose for which you have the company created? In other words, for example, ESG requirements. For example, maybe it's some of the USDA regulations requirements that prohibit small businesses from being able to crack into the monopolies that the gentlelady from New Mexico is referring to with respect to meat processing in this country. There are heavy USD regulations prohibiting that, as the gentleman from Kentucky has talked to, and I'm happy to yield to him in a minute if he would like. We could go and sit here for the next 5 days without adjourning. No, don't worry, Mr. Chairman, I won't do that. And go through a list of regulations that are impacting businesses in this country. So my question for the chairman is, do you have the full control over the means of production as a private citizen, business owner in our capitalistic system, if the government regulation is preventing you from being able to deploy that capital in the best means possible to carry out your business?
No. And this is what we're trying to address. We've seen major pieces of legislation to rewrite our economy come through Congress and have failed. And then we see different actions that go through the regulatory state, independent agencies to write regulations, to achieve those outcomes through regulation. There is a move to make our banking system the arbiter of how you allocate capital to produce energy. There are various proposals in government agencies around achieving social goals. Social goals that they then put in place into business regulation that that then controls the business outcome and their ability to actually get a return for the investors that own those businesses. So what we see here is the same intention of wholesale rewriting the economy, but through the independent agencies and the regulatory state. And so we'll bring legislation through the committee later in the Congress to address those challenges. And I think we can have a fulsome debate about whether or not that is actually achieving a better economic outcome or the stated objectives of those policies. But we need to get into those debates about climate and ESG, and we'll have formulated policy here to address those concerns.
I appreciate the chairman. I will.
Will the gentleman yield?
Well, I was directed, but if the gentlelady would like to speak, I'm not going to ask her not to.
Thank you. A lot of what we do in financial services have to do with regulations. A lot of what is attempted on my side of the aisle is to protect investors and protect people who take a chance, for example, on Wall Street investments, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's interesting to point out that for years, Wall Street preyed upon communities of color, offering predatory loans. Other banks then tried to swindle pension plans, and ultimately, there was nothing else to steal, and it all fell apart. It was this body that stepped in to rescue Americans. I'm proud of our efforts to rebuild our economy, to allow lawful businesses to prosper and Americans to succeed. So what I think is important is this. You allude to, and many Republicans allude to, businesses without credible regulation. Do whatever you want to do. Do it in whatever way you want to do it. On my side of the aisle, yes, I lead the arguments from time to time about how we have to have SEC as a cop on the block, about how we have to have the Consumer Financial Protection Agency in order to protect people who would be taken advantage of. And I think that if you're thinking about socialism as a government that should not be doing these things, that should not be stepping in to protect the average American, then I'm certainly not with that. And I don't think most Americans are with that. We are about those who want to be in business, to have the opportunity to invest their money, to save their money, to put it into businesses. But we're not about, you can do anything that you want to do. You can steal, you can undermine, you can do whatever it is to increase net
okay,
profit.
and if we can and
Yes.
explore, I was going to yield back, but I'm going to explore that for one more second, which is to say, you know, what the gentlelady describes, I've not heard any member of this side of the aisle say that they think that there should be a unfettered, unbridled environment in which there aren't certain rules of the road, right? I mean, either at the end of the day, you either have corporations who can grind over the American people. I would suggest to you a great example of that is Pfizer and Moderna making $100 billion on the back of the environment right now today where there are government mandates with pharmaceutical companies with liability protections making hundreds of billions of dollars without any liability constraint. So now those corporations can grind out right over the American people with no chance to go to court to get regress for their grievances and no chance to get any real significant government help on the side of that for this whole debate about regulations or being able to go to court, right? Those are your options. Either the capitalistic system grinds over you or you get to go to court to go sue to protect your well-being, or you're going to have some sort of government regulation to provide some guardrails. And the fact here is we're doing exactly the wrong thing right now with government, corporate cronyism, and collusion with major pharmaceutical companies that are grinding right over the American people's ability to be able to take care of themselves. So I think that's actually a really important point. And the last point that I'd make was the gentleman from Colorado, unfortunately he's not here, so I hate to refer to him in the third person, he's not here, but had talked about that the first thing that was done. What was it last year? Was the what was the act? What's the thing called? Oh, the American Rescue Plan. It's hard to remember these fancy titles. Didn't rescue anything. The fact is, what we ended up with is now 1 in 4 U.S. parents are saying they've struggled to afford food or housing in the past year, an incredibly low labor force participation rate, inflation we haven't seen for 40 years, in significant part because the government acted and engaged yet again and interfered with the ability of the American people to drive their success. And that is at the heart of the actual cultural debate we're having right now about government versus who owns the actual means of production in the private sector. I'll yield to the gentleman from Kentucky.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I think we probably ought to have a resolution that might get 430 votes, which would be to denounce cronyism, because we seem to be in agreement with that. Ms. Fernandez has had a great point about the monopoly that the meat packers enjoy. And yeah, we're working together on that, because there is a monopoly, and no monopoly can long survive in a true free market. It's the government, we give carve-outs, handouts, scale prejudicial regulations that hurt the little guys, indemnifications, which you mentioned. If we could get rid of some of those special favors that we're doing up here and get closer to true capitalism, which I think the other side of the aisle is not averse to, actually, or at least the ones here in the Rules Committee. I think this resolution presents a tougher problem for some of the other people on the floor as opposed to those of you here in the Rules Committee. But yeah, let's work together on a resolution. I'll yield back at some point to try and get 430 plus votes on basically denouncing cronyism. I'd love.
I appreciate the gentleman from Kentucky. I agree. I do think there's some common ground that we should seek on that sort of thing. I know, as you talk about the Prime Act, the gentlelady from New Mexico, I certainly support that legislation. I think that gets to the heart of what we're talking about. Free up capital, free up the American entrepreneur, free up people in their laboratories of democracy in the 50 states without having centralized, oppressive regulation coming from Washington, whether it's through the USDA, whether it's through, financial regulation, whatever it might be. Let's free the American people up to get us out of this. We want 4%, 5%, and 6% economic growth. You're not going to get out of $32 trillion of debt unless you get back to 4%, 5%, 6% economic growth. And we can do that if we trust the American people instead of government to answer those questions. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.